This is more Doug DeMuro, and today I'm going to talk about the 13 cars that I most want to review. Out of all cars that I haven't reviewed, these are the top 13. I recently did a video where I was talking about the new cars coming up that I'm most eager to review, and people said, well, what are the cars you most want to review overall? And so I sat down and I thought about it, and I really thought about it, and I came up with 13, and I have ranked them in order, 13th to 1st. So let's do it. The cars I most want to review on my Doug DeMuro main channel. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website. We've had some amazing sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this BMW M2 Competition, which sold for almost $50,000, this gorgeous Lexus LX 470, which sold for $62,500, a record price for this body style in recent years, and this gorgeous Porsche 997 Carrera S, which sold for just under $50,000. If you're looking to sell your cool car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. And if you're looking to buy a cool car from the modern era, check out Cars and Bids with daily auctions of cool cars and an amazing selection on carsandbids.com. Okay, before I get started, I do want to preface this by saying, some people will be surprised by these. There's not a lot of real exotic sports cars on this list, crazy expensive stuff. And the truth is, I've done a lot of that. Pagani, Bugatti, Koenigsegg, I filmed a lot of those cars, and they're still very interesting. The ones I haven't done, I'm still very interested in. But when I think about the cars I most want to review, it's like weird and unusual stuff that I haven't seen anything even close to it. So you might be surprised by some of the cars on this list. So let's get started. Number 13 car I most want to review, the Lincoln Blackwood. This was a complete failure luxury pickup truck that was sold in 2002 and 2003. Total disaster for sales for Lincoln. It was a complete flop, and I've always wanted to check one out. Instead of a bed, it had a trunk that was carpeted. And it had the world's worst navigation system, and they're very hard to find, and they're especially hard to find in nice shape anymore. And also, a lot of the people who have them are really proud of them, so they reach out and they say, oh, you can review my Lincoln Blackwood, my pride and joy. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to go there and just make fun of your Blackwood. But eventually I will get one, and I will tell the story of the Blackwood and how ridiculous it was. And it's one of the last ridiculous, terrible sales failure American cars that I still haven't done. And I've always wanted to, because it's probably the pinnacle of bad decision making, and I would love to do a review on it. Okay, next up, number 12 car that I most want to review, that would be the SsangYong Rodius. That's this thing. It is this bizarre looking minivan manufactured by SsangYong, which is a Korean brand. They don't sell these obviously here in North America, and they sold them in very small numbers in Europe. You see them in Asia. I saw a lot of these when I went to Korea in 2015. You see them in some other markets in Asia and maybe a few other places, but they are horribly ugly vehicles. I'm told they're not good at all. They were just sort of a cheap alternative to an actually good minivan. And of course, the design would provide a lot of humorous quirks and features, for sure, I have no doubt. And truthfully, minivan reviews do pretty well for me, especially quirky ones like the Oldsmobile Silhouette and the Toyota Previa. And I think this is the ultimate quirky minivan, at least from the modern era. It's like a complete disaster vehicle. Well, they didn't sell them in North America, so I'll have to wait until someone imports one, which will be never, because it's terrible. But anyway, number 11 car I most want to review, in the same vein, a Fiat Multipla, and the original Fiat Multipla. These cars got a lot of hate in Europe, and they still do. People make fun of how ugly they are. But as an American, our car designs are often a lot more mainstream than some of the stuff you see in Europe, especially with French cars and Italian cars like the Multipla. And when I go to Europe and see them, I'm blown away. How is this real? And I know it's ugly, and I don't know that I would really want to drive one, but I really want to review one and kind of go over how bizarre, how interesting, and how strange this vehicle is. The Multipla is getting close to the 25-year point where you can legally import a car into the United States, so hopefully someone will do that soon. I have no doubt there will be Multiplas imported, because it is kind of an interesting, quirky vehicle that I think people are going to be interested in. Next up, number 10 car I most want to review, that would be the original Chrysler minivan. I told you there would be some weird ones on here that would shock you. The original Chrysler minivan invented the minivan. To a large degree. People say that there was a Renault that came out the same year. Either way, they both would be interesting, frankly, for me to review. The minivan segment eventually took off and became incredibly popular, especially in the 90s and early 2000s. It's less popular now, but that original minivan, it's rare that you have a car that truly invents a segment that took off later. And it would just be cool to check it out. The problem is there are almost none of these original first few years Chrysler minivans still in nice shape. And so finding one, honestly, it's easier to find a Bugatti than an original Chrysler minivan to review, especially locally to me. And so it's unlikely that I'll get to do that anytime soon. But I would love to review an early minivan and kind of show, like, this is the genesis when, you know, family transport moved away from the station wagon and sedan and into these kind of taller vehicles, and then SUVs came and that sort of thing. And that minivan was a real touch point in the car industry for a long time. Next up, number 9 vehicle I most want to review, Renault Aventime. Speaking of minivans, this was a disastrous, I don't know why there's so many minivans on this list, but this is the last one. This is a disastrous vehicle. It was a two-door minivan. For some reason, Renault came up with the idea that people who wanted a minivan also wanted a coupe. And so they combined them to disastrous results. Also a complete and utter sales failure, a ridiculously ugly vehicle, although personally I find it kind of charming. I see them whenever I go to Europe, rarely now, but they're cool, in my opinion. The hate is going to come in, but they're cool and they're interesting, and I would really love to do it. Frankly, any quirky modern French car, the Renault Velsatis, I would also love to do. The Twingo is a very interesting and bizarre vehicle. There's a lot of cool, the C4 Cactus, the original Citroën Picasso, all those. But to me, the Aventime stands alone as like the most ridiculous, terrible, quirky, bizarre vehicle. And I would just love to check one out and see where the idea of a minivan coupe came from and why anyone would want it. The answer is no one did want it, but it would be cool to experience that and show off the quirks and features. Next up, the number 8 car that I most want to review is the Vector M12. I did a review on the Vector W8, which is one of the craziest supercars of all time. The M12 was the second Vector, and it's not as desirable of a car because it was primarily based on the Lamborghini Diablo, and a lot of people just call it a rebodied Diablo. That wasn't entirely true. There was more to it than that, but it wasn't as distinctive and weird and special as the original Vector W8. So the M12 is 8th on my list, not like lower because of that. It's mostly a Diablo, and I've done Diablo reviews, but it still would be tremendously interesting to review. They only made a few of them before the company went out of business for the second time, and I think a Vector M12 would be a really interesting and unusual video to check out. And frankly, it was just a really cool 90s looking supercar. I had a Hot Wheels version of it. And I think it would be neat to do, though not quite as exciting as the W8. If I had to pick between the two to review, I would do the W8, which I already did, which I'm happier about. Okay, next up, the number 7 car that I most want to review, Toyota Mega Cruiser, but the civilian version. So a lot of people don't know this, but Toyota sold a Hummer-like vehicle in Japan for the Japanese military called the Mega Cruiser. Sort of, you had the Land Cruiser, well, this was the Mega Cruiser. And it served a lot of the same purpose as the Humvee here for the US military. It was like troop transport and that sort of thing. But they did also do a civilian version. Incredibly rare, very few of them. A few people have reached out offering their imported military Mega Cruisers for me to review, but I'm going to hold out and wait until I can review a civilian Mega Cruiser. They had 4-wheel steering. Every person who's ever been interested in a Land Cruiser like me sort of idealizes the Mega Cruiser as like the ultimate Land Cruiser. And I've always wanted to check one out. And so they're becoming 25 years old. It is legal to import them. Civilian versions are very hard to find and very expensive. But my hope is that someday I am able to find one and review it. I think that would be the ultimate SUV review. Well, sort of anyway. There are actually a few SUVs I want to review even more. I'll get to those in a second. Number 6 car I most want to review, the Bugatti EB110. I have filmed almost all of the famed 90s supercars. I did the Jaguar XJ220. I did the Ferrari F50, I did the Vector, the W8, but the EB110 has still eluded me. And, you know, it's not the same Bugatti as the current brand. It had been purchased by Italians, and the EB110 was technically an Italian car built in Italy. But it was a totally crazy experience at the time. It was Bugatti back then in the 90s making a supercar, and I just would love the chance to review it. I've done all the other 90s supercars. I really want to check out the quirks and features of an EB110 and see how it drives and experience that car. And I know a lot of other people want that too. I get a lot of emails requesting it. I just haven't found one yet. Certainly not a local one, but truthfully, not even one at all. People reach out, oh, I know of an EB110, whatever. It hasn't come yet, but we hope, and that would be a very special review. Okay, next up, number 5 car I most want to review, the Maserati MC12. The MC12 was basically an Enzo, a Ferrari Enzo, but with a different and far more bizarre design. And they only made 50 of them, and then maybe some more race cars, but I would only want to do a road car. They all were the same color, this very distinctive white and blue. The MC12 is just cool. It's just really, really cool. Back in 2007, when I lived in Atlanta, I saw one on the road randomly. I was just cruising along and there was an MC12. And I came to find out later, like the guy had imported it under the show and display rule and barely drove it and that sort of thing. And I'm sure it's sold since, you know, but it was like the most amazing thing. Now, the MC12 is 5th on my list. It's not lower because it is just a Ferrari Enzo chassis drivetrain, etc., but it's still a very special, very interesting car, and certainly the highlight of anything Maserati has made in the last like 50 years. And so that car is really high on my list. I would love, love, love to review an MC12. They're just impossible to find. They weren't officially sold here. You had to show and display import them. And people just don't really drive them or use them. But I suspect one day I'll get one. Next up, number 4 car I most want to review, that would be the Mercedes G650 Landaulet. Ha ha ha, I love these things. At the end of the run of the original G-Wagon, Mercedes did some very strange versions of it. They did the 6x6, they did the 4x4 squared, but to me the craziest version was the Landaulet. Now the 6x6 seems like the craziest version mentally, because it has 6 wheels. But the Landaulet was a half convertible with portal axles and a V12. That is nuts. That's the craziest thing that exists. And I actually think the Landaulet is crazier than the 6x6. Now, the Landaulet is rarer than the 6x6. I have done a review on a 6x6 G-Wagon, and it was incredible, and driving it around was one of the great experiences of my life as a G-Wagon fan. But the Landaulet has always been more interesting and more exciting to me personally. It is surprising to me I haven't been able to review one yet, especially in Southern California. They were never sold officially in North America, but people have brought them in, you know, they come in. And they're interesting vehicles, and I've found a lot of these other like weird modern cars that weren't technically sold here, but I haven't been able to track one of these down yet, and I would kill to review a Landaulet, so I'm hoping that that happens. Next up, the number 3 car that I most want to review, Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR. I've reviewed almost every great Mercedes-Benz, but the CLK GTR has been elusive. I think there's only 35 of these, and I think like 10 are convertibles. I would take a coupe or a convertible. They are the racing version, basically, of the Mercedes CLK, but the road car of the race car. I did a Mercedes CLK DTM, which is a tremendously special car. It was sort of the slightly lesser CLK GTR, but slightly more than the regular CK AMG. But the GTR is the one you really, really want. They're massive. They're very distinctive style, very special cars. They're out there. I've never been offered one, certainly not in the States anyway, not easily accessible. But someday I would really, really, really hope to be able to do a CLK GTR. They're very unusual special vehicles, and I think it would make for a very interesting review. And fun fact, they share their taillights with the regular Mercedes CLK, although I suspect, and the headlights, although I suspect those are the only things that are shared. Okay, next up, everybody always asks me this. What are the cars, the 2 cars you most want to review? So now we're down to the top 2, and the answers are a little interesting, actually. The number 2 car that I most want to review isn't an individual car, but instead it is a weird and well-known concept car. I've reviewed a lot of production cars. They're very cool. But there comes a time in your life when you do this and you want to kind of move on to the next stage of weird, of interesting. And I think a concept car, not just any concept car, but like one that we all remember, the Ford GT90. If I could review a GT90, I would be absolutely thrilled. I wouldn't be surprised if there's only one. I don't know. Ford Indigo, that was like a race car, road car, concept car thing. I would love to review that. Dodge Copperhead, that was like a prelude to the next generation Viper. I would love to review that. Chrysler Atlantic, there are actually quite a few of these that would be cool. Now, a lot of these cars are not like in a production ready state, and a lot of things don't work on them, and I'm well aware of that. But what I would really like to do is just have the opportunity to see, like, this was a 90s wacky thought experiment. Like, I've driven all these 90s cars that made production, and some of them were pretty insane. But what were the cars like that didn't? Well, how insane was that Ford GT90? What are some of the weird features of that car? These are things people have always wanted to know. But the truth is, it's easier to track down a car that's like one of 50 or one of 100 than a concept car that's one of 1. And a lot of these cars are owned by the automakers, and I reach out and say to them, I mean, I have contacts with these PR people, and I say, hey, can I review a concept car? They don't want to. Like, they're old by now. They're not interesting anymore. And they don't really help the brand, and there's a lot of risk. You know, you got to go to Detroit, go into their special basement, they got to bring it out, get it running. It doesn't do anything for them to make this work. But I think reviewing a concept car, especially a special concept car, a good one, would be neat. Now, the number 1 concept car that I would like to review is the Italdesign Columbus. It is this thing. It was back to minivans for some reason. It had a BMW V12. It was 2 levels of car. It looks absolutely absurd in so many ways. And I think this is probably the craziest concept car, at least of the modern era. And I see pictures of this in various different places. I suspect it moved. Like I said, BMW V12, I think it probably runs, and I'm sure that Italdesign still owns it. I bet BMW wanted nothing to do with it once they saw it. But I really would love the opportunity to review the Italdesign Columbus. I think it's probably the craziest concept car of the modern era, and I think filming a quirks and I mean, that's an hour. If I filmed that video, that would be an hour-long video, and I would travel to Italy to film this car, but just this one. There's no other car that could make me want to fly just to Europe to review it individually, but this car deserves it. And finally, this is it, folks. Everyone asked this question. Here's the answer. The #1 car I most want to review more than any other car. Again, a little bit of a cop-out because it's not entirely one car, but I will try to clarify. The cars owned by the Sultan of Brunei. Everyone knows, every car enthusiast in the world knows, the Sultan of Brunei, a tiny little oil-rich nation in Southeast Asia, has the greatest car collection ever assembled. And the cars are very special. There's McLaren F1s, and there's this, and there's that. There's a lot of cool stuff. I don't care about any of the normal cars in the collection. I can find those. The cars that I care about are the one-off. He had Ferrari, Bentley, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce build him individual cars that were only sold to him. And can you imagine the quirks of a car, of a one-off or a 10-off production run for a Sultan in the 90s in Asia? Like, it must be insane. So I look at his collection and I just think I would give anything to go down there. I know a lot of the cars supposedly aren't running anymore, but I would give anything to go down there and shoot some of these cars. The Ferrari Mythos, based on the Testarossa. The Ferrari FX, a car designed and built, only seen and driven and operated by the Sultan of Brunei. The Bentley Buccaneer is this bizarre looking coupe that has these remnants of like an old 30s Bentley or a 20s one. I would kill. I mean, I would do anything. The Ferrari 456 Venice. You know, Ferrari has never made a 4-door car before. Well, guess what? If you throw enough money at them, they'll make you one. And the Sultan of Brunei did that. He got them to make a station wagon version of the Ferrari 456. And there was a sedan version that was made as well, just for the Sultan of Brunei. And these cars, there's like photographs from the 90s floating around the internet of these cars. But no one has seen them since. Now, the 456 Venice, one of them or few of them have gotten out. Occasionally the Sultan will sell a car, but rarely one of these special cars. It's usually they do auctions to sell like Mercedes. But he has these very, very unique individual special cars. And I think the idea of reviewing a one-off car like this. Now, with that said, there is one Sultan of Brunei car that I would take over all the others to review, and that would be the Bentley Dominator. The Sultan of Brunei had Bentley make him an SUV before everyone else realized SUVs are cool. And there are these Dominator pictures that float around the internet. We know this was what it looked like. We know it was based on a P38 Range Rover. We don't know much more than that. Supposedly, Bentley had the Sultan send the Dominators back to Bentley when they were working on the Bentayga, just to kind of see how they did it back then. But then they're back to the Sultan now. No one has seen them. No one has driven them. I would give anything. Not only would I give anything to review one, I would spend a lot of money to buy a Bentley Dominator. This was an early luxury SUV. This was, the Sultan knew that luxury SUVs were gonna take off before the automakers knew. And he had Bentley build them, I think like 10 or 12 Dominators. And I just think that would be the coolest car in the world. Commissioning a brand to build you a car they don't build you. Any of those, FX, Dominator, Buccaneer, any of those cars. And so if I ever had the opportunity to go to the Sultans and review those cars, I would do that in 2 seconds. So the #1 car I want to review is like these special one-off Sultan of Brunei cars. They must be so quirky and so interesting, and I have just mentally spent so much energy thinking about them over the years. It would just be cool to check them out. But there you go. That's it. Everybody always asks, what are the top cars you want to review? I thought about it a lot. Another one, by the way, the 1990s Maserati Quattroporte. A lot of Americans don't even know this car existed. It was never sold here, but this is the predecessor of the one we got in the early 2000s. That would probably be number 14. There's a lot of cars that I want to review still, honestly. I could make a list of probably 200 or 300 cars that I still want to review, not even getting into new cars. But these are the tops for sure. So if you have a Bentley Dominator, Sultan of Brunei, are you watching? Please let me review it, or let me buy it from you, please, please. But those are the cars. Those are the ones I most want to review, and now you know.